This is Dr. Don Boynowski for Blue Mountain Radio, KQBM 90.7. Today I'm going to be speaking with Dr. John Searle, Professor of Philosophy at UC Berkeley, where he began his career at the age of 26. He's the recipient of numerous awards and prizes in the field of cognitive science. Dr. Searle has published 18 books and countless articles on the structure of language, mind, and social ontology, and he's widely regarded and recognized as one of the world's great philosophers of mind and language. Welcome to the program, Dr. Searle. Do you think that television was similar to what's happening now on computers, or do you think that was a whole other different thing?
I think it was quite different because there's a sense in which your relation to television was much more passive than the relation to the computer. In the case of the computer, you're constantly controlling it by clicking. In the case of the television, all you can do is change the channel. But again, I'm not sure what the long-term effect of television was, and I'm suspicious of these people who say, well, it must have been horrible. We just don't know. And the same with a computer. We don't know the effect, but as a professor, I observe an effect. And that is, I observe my students are less able to write in longhand, to write in cursive, and they're less able to concentrate for extended periods of time. There's a series of lectures called TED, and TED is extremely effective. I just gave a TED lecture, and they're extremely effective. These lectures are on the internet. You can get them, and one of the reasons they're effective is they recognize people have a concentration span of about 15 minutes. You can't give a lecture longer than about 15 minutes, and maybe that's right. Maybe that's what we have produced is a society, a culture of people who really have a attention span that doesn't go to a half an hour.
That's probably true, and I know that some of the leading gamers that actually write the programs to produce games that are so popular on the internet these days say that gaming, the programs they write, they're appealing to the gamer's sense of narcissism, and in fact studies have been done that show that it increases narcissism. Which is interesting.
I've never played these games, so I can't tell you, but it's not plausible to me.
I hear you. So how do you think America has changed in more recent times, maybe just the last 10 years?
Oh, well, I mean, that's a tough question, but let me tell you an obvious change, and that is politics in Washington has become much less productive. The normal pattern of political behavior was that the two parties made a lot of noise, and then they reached a compromise solution. That seems to be out of the question now, and in fact, I would date that. I think it goes back to Newt Gingrich in just before the turn of the century, that the civility and collegiality in Washington has declined dramatically. You see that when Nancy Pelosi grew up as the daughter of a congressman, they had the other parties around the other members of the other party around a dinner at their house, and it was quite friendly. I think that is all in serious decline, and the Republicans that their really aim now is to make sure that Obama fails, on the idea that if he fails, then they will benefit. Maybe if the public understands that it's their fault that he fails, they won't benefit, but they haven't got that concept. So I think that our public life is seriously impeded by Republican obstructionism, and no journalist can say this because they have this myth that they have to be completely even-handed. But I think it's one of those rare times in American history when it's pretty much the gridlock in Washington is pretty much the fault of one party, and I just don't know how it's going to turn out, but it turns out that they said in the recent Republican retreat that their main aim now is to make sure that Obama has no successes, even if the success would benefit the country, even if the success is the kind of thing that many Republicans agree with on things like gun control and on immigration. They're very anxious to guarantee that he fails. I think that's a serious decline in American public life. However, there are a lot of good things in American public life. I think that we continue to educate a high percentage of the population with higher intellectual level than pretty much any other country in history. Now, there has been a decline in support for public education, and that's a disaster, but it's not it's still worth emphasizing that if you list the best universities in the world, an amazingly high percentage of them are in the United States. So I regard that as a beneficial feature of the past few decades.
That's interesting. So another hypothetical question, and in this question we'll assume that the president actually did have some power. If you were president, what's some of the first things you would change?
Well, I think, for example, the idea that gun control is somehow or other unconstitutional is absolutely ridiculous. And we got this organization, the National Rifle Association. I don't know what their stated aims are, and I'm sure they're very nice people individually, but the net effect is they facilitate the murder of children, and that's not a good thing. And somebody ought to say what I just said. They may be nice people as individuals, but the net effect of their institution is to facilitate the massacre of innocent people, but especially children, as we saw not so long ago. So those are the sorts of things that I would say if I were president. And then, of course, you got to do something about immigration. Yes, of course, it's a terrible thing that all these people come across the border illegally, and we got to stop that. But the truth is, you got 10 million illegal immigrants in the United States. There's no way you're going to get rid of all of them, or even a sizable number. We just would have to turn ourselves into a dictatorship if we were going to get all those people out of the country. So those are two things that the president has to deal with. Now, another thing is the idiocy of the economic discussion. It goes back to 1936. It was the same discussion in 1936 with Roosevelt. The Republicans were basically screaming that we can't have this federal deficit. And Roosevelt was saying we got to solve the problem of unemployment. And I think in that particular case, Roosevelt was right and the Republicans were wrong. The idea that there's some terrible crisis over the deficit is total nonsense. I mean, we had a terrible deficit in the Second World War, and we emerged stronger than ever economically as a result. So that's a third point that I would take up in public policy. And again, it's hard to find an intelligent discussion of this because everybody talks as if the deficit were a terrible crisis. It's not.